Welcome to her remarkable history. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The Forgotten Mistress of Cardinal Wolsey. Throughout the Tudor period, there were many mistresses who slept with King Henry VIII. Husbands and fathers would encourage their wives and daughters to catch the eye of the king, to make sure that their name and family would be promoted in the king's courts. It's sad that many men saw advancement in their wives if they took to the king's bed, but having a mistress during the Tudor era was rather common, especially for those who were high up in society and in royal court. There was one man and cardinal who became incredibly important to Henry VIII, but despite the fact he was incredibly religious and devoted to his faith, he also had a forgotten mistress and alleged illegitimate child from this affair. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey became the Lord Chancellor and the King's chief advisor. But what is the story of his mistress and affair? Joan Lake was born around 1490 in Yarmouth in Norfolk, and she was the daughter of Peter Lark, and he was an innkeeper in Thetford, and also a common councilman. He later became a gentleman of Huntingdonshire, and Joan was from a rather prominent family. But in spring of 1509, King Henry VII was gravely ill, and as he lay, dying in his bed, he was surrounded by his closest attendants and courtiers. It would be his son Henry, his second son, who would succeed him and become King Henry VIII. Years earlier, his older brother Arthur had died, and Henry was never supposed to be the heir apparent, or the King of England, and he was raised as a spare heir, along with his sisters, and he was given an education that was not fit for a complete successor. But he would later become king, and Henry VIII, when he came onto the throne, was around 17, and his priorities and beliefs were not focused on ruling England and creating a strong country. He was a young man who enjoyed the title and life of being a king, but he was not a man who had the patience to complete tedious and boring duties that came with being a monarch. He wanted to spend money, have parties, be a teenager, and most of all, have fun. In the previous years, Thomas Wolsey had been a priest and chaplain for Henry VII. He became an almoner when Henry VII came onto the throne, and this was an important position. Wolsey's job was to distribute chunks of the king's money to the poor people, and following this job, he was seen as a trusted and key advisor. Wolsey gained more and more responsibilities, and he would become a man who would later advise Henry VIII closely, and would be seen as an invaluable member of court. Wolsey would practically be acting later as a second king and ruler, and he was the man who dealt with all of the decisions that the young King Henry VIII did not want to deal with himself, and Wolsey was approached by many people who wished to petition the king for something. However, it was known that Thomas Wolsey was involved in a relationship and a physical affair with a woman by the name of Joan Lake, who was also known as Mistress Lake. At the time, it wasn't a distinct rule and law in England for men of cloth and priests to remain celibate, so it's unlikely at the time that Wolsey ever encountered any significant criticism for this. His relationship with Joan may have been frowned upon by other members of the clergy, but Wolsey would not stop seeing Joan. Wolsey kept their relationship rather secretive, and it's not known whether Joan herself was married. She may possibly have been. She's been referred to in many documents from the time as being Wolsey's mistress, and it's believed that their affair lasted at least a decade, and that she was a long-time companion of the chief advisor of King Henry VIII. However, as Wolsey rose to power, he gained a significant amount of wealth and land also. He was given a dwelling at St Bride on Fleet Street in 1510, and it was said, Thomas Wolsey, the King's chaplain, Dean of Lincoln, grant go message called the parsonage with garden adjoining, in parish of St Bride, Fleet Street, London, with the abbot and convent of Westminster demised, 26th of November, Henry VII for 99 years to Richard Eason attained, also of the Orchard and 12 gardens in the same parish, with Thomas Dowker, prior of the Hospital of St. John of Jerusalem, demised for 99 years to the said Sir Richard. By giving this huge estate and amount of land, Wolsey and Joan Lake would live together at this address, and it's commonly believed that the pair did have children together. It's believed that Joan gave birth to 2 of Wolsey's children, the first being a son called Thomas Winter, who was born in 1510. The fact that Winter was Wolsey's son has been disputed, and there are claims that he was not related to him at all, or that he was actually his nephew. It's not known why his name would have been Winter and not Wolsey, but Thomas would later become the Dean of Wells. Another child born in 1512 was a daughter named Dorothy, who was adopted, and she later entered Shaftesbury Abbey as a nun. And she even received a pension from Cromwell, where her religious house was dissolved. The house they would live in would become Bridewell Palace, and this became a huge and wealthy manor and palace for Henry VIII. But Wolsey continued to rise throughout the ranks of the Church and the King's government. He eventually became the Bishop of London, Archbishop of York, a Cardinal Prince of the Church of Rome, and then the Lord Chancellor of England. Joan was considered a beautiful woman, but her presence embarrassed Wolsey, possibly due to the clash with his senior position within the Church. In 1519, he would later arrange her marriage to the Squire of Adlington Hall, and together Joan and George Ley had 4 children. But after this, Wolsey's career would go from strength to strength inside of Henry VIII's court, until he fell spectacularly from grace. He managed to encounter a number of enemies at court, but he could not get the annulment the king wanted for his first wife, so he could marry Anne Boleyn. Anne's faction and family may have been behind Wolsey's downfall, and in 1529 he was stripped of his government office and property, and he lost everything, including Hampton Court Palace, which he was working on. He was accused of treason and was ordered back to London. However, he would, on the journey back, become ill, and he died at Leicester inside of the abbey there. Just before he died, he stated, "I see the matter against me, how it is framed, but if I had served God as diligently as I have done the king, he would not have given me over in my grey hairs." But despite being a very religious man and a cardinal, Thomas Wolsey would have a long-standing mistress and would father 2 illegitimate children with Joan Lark. Wolsey would die in 1530, and 2 years later, whilst in childbirth, Joan Lark would pass away in 1532. She is remembered today as the Mistress of Wolsey, but she would die anyway from the dizzying heights of the Tudor royal court, and what happened to her after the end of her affair is not the most well known. Her husband was given some land by the king, but today Joan Lark is remembered as one of the many forgotten mistresses of the Tudor period. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.